lot of Asian men were seen as timid and not desirable because, one, they didn't have self-confidence, and two, they wouldn't take the risk because they were afraid of being rejected. So it's this kind of upbringing that, like, the fear of rejection is so strong with us. It makes us not see our full potential because we just don't want to experience that, humiliation or that feeling. But you can only get better if you can get back up and go down again, and eventually you'll actually get better. But I think that fear of falling down is gives us paralysis.
100%.
And one of the things I think I came to the conclusion right after all this journey and writing everything I do, I realized, I started from a place where I felt Asians are invisible. Like, we just feel invisible and we feel unseen. But I realized that we feel like we're unseen, but oftentimes we don't even see ourselves. Like, that's the real problem. Like, we don't even see ourselves. So how can anyone else see us?
Welcome back to Big Asian Energy. We talk a lot about things like the bamboo ceiling. We talk about how a lot of Asian Americans we're everywhere in our work. We're so good at what we do, but oftentimes still underrepresented in our power. Not because we lack talent, but because so many of us maybe have not yet learned how influence works in different kind of contexts. But today we're going to dive deeply into this from somebody who truly has seen this, not just on as an individual, but has worked with actual real, like, ceiling breakers and change makers. And speaking of which, I mean, if you're new here, I'm John Wang, and each week on Big Asian Energy, we talk to Asian ceiling breakers, change makers, and a few troublemakers who redefine what it means to be Asian American leaders. And today, honestly, I cannot think of somebody who better represent all three of those categories. Today, we're talking to Dave Liu, who's one of the most influential builders behind Asian American leadership and entrepreneurship. Dave is the founder of Hyphen Capital and Hyphen Nation, where he invests in and amplifies Asian American founders, leaders, and cultural shapers. Long before the topic around Asian diversity even really was showing up, Dave was already building real infrastructure in capital, community, and visibility for Asian Americans, especially in tech and beyond. Dave's a serial entrepreneur and Emmy award-winning producer for HBO's 38 at the Garden about Jeremy Lin, and a nationally recognized voice on Asian American leadership, representation, and power. And really, if you take a look at this guy, I mean, everything he does, really so much of his core is about helping Asian Americans to stop waiting to be chosen and start building influence on our own terms. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Wow. That was quite the intro. I need to learn from you how to do an intro on a podcast.
Every bit of that was 100% earned.
No, thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, man. So I was so excited. We got connected through a mutual friend of ours, who, by the way, is somebody who I so admire, Vicky Tsai, who is the founder of Tacha. And, at that point, I'd already heard of you. And, we were already trying to get connected. But the more I started reading your work, the more I read into the depth of it, the more I was like, wow, like, this guy's the real deal. Well, a lot of us talk about Asian representation, but so few have actually been in the deep trenches of, taking founders all the way to these massive, huge, multi-million, sometimes in the billion level scales. So I would just love to know, Dave, how did you get started in this journey?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty unexpected. I mean, I, like everyone else, Asian American, Taiwanese American, like a son of immigrants born in New Jersey, was just trying to, make it. And I think I'd done the whole jumping through hoops, going to an Ivy League school, going to work at big name companies, consulting, Yahoo, eBay, branding, building up their resume, going to Stanford for business school, doing everything I thought I needed to do to, one, make my parents proud, but two, find validation and self-worth through all the hoops I was jumping through. And
yeah, I can't relate to that at all.
Like,
I'm sure none of our listeners.
Exactly. Can. So, your audience will understand the chase for self-worth and validation from just doing things and achieving things. Yeah. It just led to, emptiness again and again. And so I think, I had become a founder twice over. I founded two companies, and I realized, I think that ego is stripped away when you start your first company, and you don't have a brand name to stand behind. I had my resume, but when people at cocktail parties would ask me what I do, I was like, I was starting some company they never heard of. And you get humbled real quick. But then you also, I think it helps you to realize how much of our validation is in our resumes because our parents taught us that, or taught us to believe that that is where our self-worth is derived from. And so through that, I started building community with other Asian American founders because I felt like I started creating this community because I feel like we're often not the best at networking.
Mhm.
We stick to ourselves, keep our heads down, not just you know, in work, but in life in general. But that also holds us back in a lot of ways from building power, building relationships, um, building that network that can actually help us get to where we want to go. And it keeps us in a box. And it also, I mean, in many ways, it perpetuates the myth that Asians are not, are quiet and they're passive, and they kind of are doormats in some ways, because they just do what they're told and they don't break rules, they don't disagree, they don't argue.
Mhm.
Um, in a lot of ways, I found that our cultural kind of upbringing is sometimes the downfall of a lot of our kind of pursuits of success because, we hold back too often and we don't speak up. And that's not what's valued in Western society and cultures. And so I think, yeah, a lot of this came about because it's kind of a journey of self discovery and understanding. And the writing comes from I mean, it really helps me to process my own upbringing, cultural kind of baggage,
Mhm.
and understanding why it is I do the things I do. But I found that with an audience that really resonates, because a lot of times I'll meet strangers at different events, or even in walking in the museum, people will stop me and they'll tell me they read my essays, and they're just they'll say that everything I've said is what they've thought, but they haven't been able to quite pinpoint why they behave the way they do.
Mhm.
And so for me, it's kind of like a cathartic process of kind of understanding why I'm wired the way I am, and how to
Mhm.
sometimes unwire, that, and change my programming sometimes.
Mhm.
And it takes time, but I think if you're not aware of, if you know the symptoms, but you're not aware of the cause, then you can't really fix it. So I hope that my writing and the podcasts help people to kind of identify those things.
Mm. Now, first and foremost, I'm going to give a quick shout out to your podcast. If you haven't checked it out yet, Hyphenation is what it's called, right?
Yep.
So Hyphenation is on both Substack as well as a podcast, and I'm a subscriber to it. I check it out. Dave interviews Asian American leaders and founders and all these people, and kind of dive deeper into it. So following up this question, I feel like this is personally one of the biggest struggles is there's two competing narratives I often find in
Mhm.
the Asian American spheres. One is we're facing the bamboo ceiling because of systemic views. We're stereotyped, like we are seen as being less assertive. And then there's also this part of us that is also there. We kind of like, I personally felt it for sure growing up, that like I do go into these, I'm going to call myself out for this, but people pleasing, right?
Mhm.
I am way too nice sometimes. I am not always the sharpest when it comes to like making my point out there. So between these 2 points, I mean, which one do you feel like is more important for us to address? Because they're both important, but
Yeah.
perhaps more relevant when it comes to the people you're actually working with and seeing on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think the duality of our cultures, there's something about there's a lot of, good, that comes from being humble and helping others, and worrying and having empathy. And I don't think that the pendulum has to swing all the way to become some jerk bro who just doesn't care about anybody else but themselves, as we're seeing a lot of in today's society. But I think there's a fine balance, because you can still have that humble leadership, but you also don't have to silence yourself. A lot of times we go out of our way to make ourselves small to make others feel comfortable. And we also worry a lot because of how we were raised, being concerned about the judgment of others, because at least my mom specifically, I'm calling her out, but the comparisons we get to other peers or cousins, or whatever. You are constantly comparing yourself to others. Constantly benchmarking yourself against where others are at, so you get really concerned about kind of the judgment of others and how they view you and how
Mhm.
you're perceived. the way we shield that is by building up our resumes so that people can't say those things. And so, but I think there's something about that desire to build confidence through those things, or validation, that honestly it leaves us empty inside, but also you don't really have. I mean, you. It's funny how many people have all these accolades and yet still lack self confidence. So,
Mm.
because you know how to get past the test, but sometimes you think you're lucky that you got through, or whatever it is. But I think it's something about that, understanding what you actually brought to the table, what you bring to the table, your skill sets, your value. But until people find that, or find that they don't have to make themselves small for others,
Mm.
it's really hard to be seen. Because I mean, I've talked about this. I had an interview with Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer from Stanford, one of my professors at school, and we talked about how all the rules to gain power are antithetical to what Asians actually how they live. So breaking rules, like, that's not something we're raised to follow every rule. Don't stick out. um, don't One of the rules is to be self-promotional and build your
Mm.
brand. We are never self-promotional because that's seen as arrogant. And so just even talking about yourself is very uncomfortable. And you always kind of preface things and hedge, by saying, oh, I'm not sure about this, but, or I might be wrong, but even the way we talk is, we're always trying to mitigate damage or risk.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from, I think, growing up. I don't know if I know all kids are precious, but I feel like my Asian parent friends and my parents, like, they always were afraid of us taking risks or falling or getting injured. And it's probably
Yeah.
because they didn't have health insurance or didn't want to go through the hospital and go through that trouble, but they didn't want to go to the doctor. So I feel like growing up in that way of not wanting to, crack eggshells, or break anything or do anything that might cause a problem, that causes us to be very cautious and timid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the ones who've broken through have, like the ones I've talked to, they aren't that. They have clearly, time and time again, decided, I need to, I can't follow. If I follow the rules, then I'll be just like everyone else. I'll blend in. I have to actually do my, break the rules, do my own thing,
Mm-hmm.
be self promotional, build that network, make sure that people know who I am and the work I do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of times we're taught that people will see us and give us credit for the work we do.
Mm.
That's hardly ever true. If you don't take credit for your work, someone else will take credit for it. So again, advocating for yourself, having agency. I think too many Asians, they don't have agency. They let someone else decide for them, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why, in a hierarchical culture where filial piety is such that anyone who's superior or senior to you or elder, you kind of just obey them and you just suck it up and you endure. But you hope that you'll get rewarded for your work, or recognized, but that doesn't happen here. I think I see time and time again people telling me that their peers were promoted above them even though they were way more qualified. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, but did your management or your superiors actually know what you did or who you are? Have they ever had coffee with you before? Do they know you as a person? We kind of keep ourselves siloed in this private way, but even at work we separate work and home culture very with a wall. Whereas others, they actually socialize with their bosses and their peers, and that's how they get promoted, because their bosses actually know who they are as people. Versus, this is a job, I clock in, I clock out, this is a paycheck, and then I'm done, I'm going back to my world. Because it's so uncomfortable for us to be in those environments that we don't feel like we fit in, so we kind of separate it out. Like, we have a home personality and we have a work personality, and that separation makes it harder for us to kind of make it.
Hmm. So this, I like this last point you're talking about. You and I, we've kind of covered it, and I think we have a lot of shared views, especially around communication, right? Like, when I wrote Big Asian Energy, one of the biggest things I was like,
Yeah.
I needed to put in a communication section, which is
Yep.
just like, how do we speak more assertively without changing who we are? Like,
Yeah.
like doing a mitigation audit, doing like, we're, catching all those language little patterns and stuff like that. And these are usually pretty practical things that when I talk to people, they're like, okay, great. I could go into my emails and like, yeah, I do often say I'm just an engineer. Why do I keep saying that? Let's,
Yeah.
let's like throw that shit out. I think the deeper, like harder thing that I often see, especially as questions, is like, okay, we are just more humble. And like, that's an upbringing thing, right? You talked
Sure.
about this like two character, like two essentially like personas that we have, or
Yeah.
we code switch. There's the work self, and then there's the private self. Is the end goal just to be like own who we are more in the workplace? Because there's still a difference, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, I see the thing is, I think if you think about how you are with your friends when you're comfortable with, your Asian friends and you're very open and
Yeah.
animated, I mean, I don't know that you're always people always feel like they can be that when they're at the workplace, because I think there's a lot we censor ourselves in a lot of ways, or we try to portray a certain professionalism persona. But I mean, in a lot of ways, people connect to those who are human, and how you are. If you are
Hmm.
genuine and authentic, like at home, you need to be that in the workplace too. And if it's not
Hmm.
the right workplace, you leave that workplace if you don't see if it isn't a fit. But when you censor yourselves, you censor the parts of yourself you don't like, but you censor parts of yourself that are likable too. And so this is why if people think, oh, Asians have no personality, or they don't have presence, or they don't have you know any of that, those words that they throw out, presence and charisma and this or that, it's like,
Gravitas.
yeah, gravitas. I mean, a lot of these are, excuses for them not promoting you.
Yeah.
But I've learned that, if that was true, then you wouldn't see so many, you know, Indian men who are CEOs.
Yeah.
Like, they have their cultures teach them that, our cultures avoid conflict, avoid, any tension.
Yeah.
Their cultures are ones of debate and argument. If you are, there's nothing wrong with having debate. I think,
Mm.
and that makes a big difference in the workplace. If you're actually willing to bring up ideas and be wrong, that is
Hmm.
okay, because that's actually appreciated.
Hmm.
If the alternative is don't say anything and just be quiet, then you're just going to blend into the wallpaper, and of course they're not going to know who you are. So
Hmm.
I think there is part of that. If you're so in the workplace, at home you'd be not afraid to bring up topics and say whatever you want to say, because you may
Hmm.
be right, you may be wrong, but you're not
Yeah.
afraid. In the workplace, it's like a test. You go in, it's like going to SAT, and you're like, if you're wrong, you will be shamed, and you will not get into school. You will get a like, well,
You'll get a B. You'll get-
but we're so afraid of that, of being wrong, that we
yeah.
won't even bring up the things that we want to say. Like, we have an answer,
Yeah.
but we won't say it because we're afraid of being wrong. And I think that ultimately holds us back the most, is that fear of the judgment, constantly worrying about that all the time. When
Hmm.
in reality, most people aren't that judge. I mean, they're judgmental for a second, or they might think of you for a second, but we think way more about this than they do. And
Mm.
I think it is part of growing up thinking that everything is a test, and everything is, kind of, you're rated on every single thing.
Yeah.
And so if we play that way in life, I mean, of course we're going to hold back.
100%. I mean, you're so right about that. I mean, I feel like so many of us went through that high school phase where like everything literally did feel like a test. Like, you want to go play sports? Oh, is this going to be something you can put on your college resume?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how can we grade you on how well you play?
Yeah.
Sometimes starts at such a young age that it just
Yep.
becomes ingrained in us that like anything
Yeah.
that we do publicly is being graded, is being watched, is being challenged.
Yep.
So, what advice do you give that that are practical for people, especially who are maybe right now, especially right now, there's a lot of people looking for jobs,
Hmm.
and self promotion is such an important part of it. And either you're looking for the next level up for a job or for a new job. What advice do you give to those people so that they can be
Yeah.
seen more?
I mean, I'll be honest. I think, it's proven that women, and I'm gonna guess that Asians, for sure, will not apply to jobs that they only check off 5 of the 10 bullet points of job
Oh,
requirements.
hmm.
Whereas, like, a white male will have no problems applying if they have 2 or 3 of those, bullet points out of 10.
There's a study
Um,
that shows this too. Yeah.
yeah, there's a study that shows it, and I think it's that confidence that, I can do this job,
Yeah.
even if I only qualify 2 or 3, because I mean I can do all those things if I want to apply myself to it.
Hmm.
Whereas I think for a lot of women and, a lot of Asians, they're like, well, of course I can't apply for this job. I don't meet, like, all 10. And so they filter themselves out of the process automatically. But a lot of that is, I think that mentality that you have to be perfect for everything you do, and
Hmm.
everything is about perfection. And so if you aren't 10 out of 10, why would you even bother applying? I think that, we underestimate how, much we're able to do, or what we've done in the past, or we devalue or under kind of outvalue all of our achievements. It's funny. I invest in founders all the time, and one of the companies that's really successful right now. I remember they gave me a pitch deck, and they had on the chart like basically it was like a video game system. They showed Nintendo and PlayStation, and then they showed worst possible outcome. I mean, the worst possible outcome for this would be this line. It was like low. I'm like, you guys need to show the best possible outcome. Like, why? Because I mean, like, I no one wants to invest in the worst possible outcome, but it was a reflection of this hedging of
Right.
like we don't want to like fail, so
Yeah.
we'll lower the bar so that we won't fail. But I'm like, and now these guys are outselling Xbox. It's like crazy. The holidays they've sold out all their stuff, and it's like this is what like we kind of hold ourselves back. We make ourselves more cautious. We lowest possible like worst possible outcome, but it's still this is going to be great. But
Mm,
like Hassan says in 30 of the Garden, like we hold ourselves small, but if we had the audacity that these other people did, like how much more could we do? That word audacity, I think it's even if we pushed ourselves to be a little more audacious, I mean, even if we push ourselves to be very audacious, we'll probably just be a little more, and that little bit more can make a big difference. And I think having bold goals or
mm,
having that self-confidence to just apply, like what's the worst that can happen? Or sometimes I won't even reach out to some people. Be like, oh no, I can't reach out to the CEO for coffee because that's inappropriate, or I'm just a peon, or I have nothing to offer. Do you think someone else is saying that? They're like, no, they're just emailing the CEO, or they see them in the hallway and say, hey, can I grab coffee with you? The worst they
mm,
can say is no, I'm busy, or whatnot. But I
yeah.
mean, I think far too often we're so scared all the time of being like getting rejected,
Mm,
and failing. And so it's funny. This is probably not an appropriate analogy, but for dating, I think a lot of Asian men were seen as timid and not desirable because one, they didn't have self-confidence, and two, they wouldn't take the risk because they were afraid of being rejected. So it's
mm,
this kind of upbringing that like the fear of rejection is so strong with us that it makes us not see our full potential, because we just don't want to experience that humiliation or that feeling. But if you do it a few times and you fall down and you get back up again, it's easier and easier. Like when you learn to ski, you keep falling down, but you can only get better if you can get back up and go down again, and eventually you'll actually get better. But I think that fear of falling down is
mm.
gives us paralysis.
So how do we, or how do the listeners, like, I think to a certain degree, we would love to all have this like big swagger, self confidence, that audacity to
Big
show up
Asian
every single
energy.
day, that big Asian energy. Yeah, that's right. So I think the core question that many people have is how do we tap into that? Because
Mm.
that voice of that inner criticism, that self doubt, imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it, it goes deep, right?
Mhm.
Like this is
Yeah,
childhood shit. So like,
yeah.
how do you, or have you seen people who have broken through it? How do they do it?
I mean, at some point, I think it's for everyone. It's not caring about what other people think. It really is. If you can get through that, I mean, I think it's the hardest thing because we cared so much about what our parents thought, and then we cared so much about what our teachers thought. We care so
Mm,
much about what bosses think, and so we live for their validation. When in reality, I mean, they're just as valuable as we are, and so they're no different. I mean,
yeah.
people come to me all the time and like, oh, Dave, I'm so amazed at all the things you've done and this or that, and you know, I keep thinking I'm like you're no different than me. I'm you have all the same ability to do what I did, but I mean, I just did it. And so
Mm,
I think it's just almost like a switch, that we all have, that we switch on. It's not like the people think, oh, the switch is only for Michael Jordan when he's okay, I'm losing and I'm just gonna flip a switch and I'm just gonna win. It's not
mm,
like that. It's not like Mamba mentality all of a sudden. But
mm,
in a way, on a smaller scale, it is that mentality where if you just block out all of the doubters and the haters and worries about comments, and it's like, oh, I don't want to post this because I'm worried about all the comments I'll get, whatnot.
mm,
I don't want to start a podcast because what if no one listens? I don't want to start a company because what if I have no customers? It's like, but what are you missing out if you actually put that out there? What are you missing out on if
mm,
you put the podcast out there and the people that you'd actually help? What are you missing out on if you actually, wrote this essay and shared your, your knowledge and your wisdom, and you might be helping one or two people. I mean, for every comment that you get, I started writing. I mean, this is back in when I was Zanga, and I was just writing for my friends. And then I started like writing essays because I thought, hey, I like writing. I enjoy it. I don't know if I'm a good writer or not, but for me, it's a process. It's like it helps me
Mhm.
think through things. And then I had all these people saying, "Oh my gosh, you're such a good writer. Like I really appreciate this essay." I had founders come and say, "Hey, I read this essay. I would love for you to invest in my company." And those companies gone on to do great. Um, I think by reaching just by worrying about the people that will hear it or
Mhm.
will resonate, you
Mhm.
can forget all the people that are like haters or whatever, because they'll amount to nothing anyway. So
Mhm.
I have always found in my spaces, like the people who criticize the most or have the most criticism, they're just trying to sound intelligent. All the people who are online and other things,
Mm.
it's the same as like a company that should be unnamed here, big tech company, has a lot of like McKinsey type folks who they just sit in meetings for like hours just
Yeah.
arguing sound right, even though it's like not adding anything. But I think you sound smarter if criticize. And so I'm like, you know what, I've been around long enough to know that those people are weak and they have nothing better to add anyway, so
Yeah.
I don't worry about them. I do my own thing. But the
Yeah.
more the more you focus on what good you bring or the joy you have
Mhm.
in writing and doing having these conversations for podcasts, like those comments you get, the message you get that are positive, those
Mhm.
really, really stand out. And so
Yeah.
I know it's really hard in today's, world and social media to not feel the effects of, the mean comments or this or that. But I always just tell myself these are basement losers who amount to nothing. So I don't really care about them anyway. I mean, for the most part, it's true, right? They're living at home doing,
Brutal, Dave.
but when you
But it's
think that these,
100% true. 100%. Yeah,
right?
dude. Yeah.
And if you
Like
think
I've
that,
been in your comments on LinkedIn. I've been in your comments on LinkedIn calling people out.
yeah,
100%. Yeah.
yeah. And so, I mean, I think it's like, you know what? You don't have to respond to all these people. Just
Yeah.
block them, ignore them. I mean, I think
Let them go.
in life you just have to learn how to block and ignore these people.
Yeah.
But keep doing what you do and know what you know the value add, and you keep doing that. And you don't. I mean, I think you will build that confidence slowly. But I think it's a mentality shift of caring so much about the negative.
100%. Like one of the things that I've learned in the process is like this is the framework I use when I go to content create, because I still get that, right? Like there's a fear of getting attacked. And you're
Yeah,
talking like when you talk about Asians, people immediately assume this is going to be racial, it's going to be discriminatory, it's going to be a whole thing. Like it brings out
yeah,
everyone wants to have something to say about it. And
yeah,
where I've landed is like truthfully 99% of people just don't care about you at all.
yeah.
they don't
It's
they
one hundred
don't care.
percent true.
They will never think about you twice. They care
No,
about how you view them. So there's
exactly.
going to be 20% of people who are like hardcore your raving fans. They just want to support you in whatever you
Mhm.
do. And then there's going to be 20% of like no matter who you are, they just hate you. Like
Oh yeah,
it's not about you, it's just who you represent.
one
Right?
hundred percent.
Maybe you represent the kind of Asian that they want to be. Maybe they represent the kind of Asian they don't want to see. Right? Even
Yeah,
though when I was putting out big Asian energy, like I had friends, I'm not going to name them, but people who are vocal on the internet who was like, you can't say that. I had literally somebody who say Asians aren't supposed to be confident. And I was like, what
yeah,
the beep are you
yeah.
talking about? Like, where are you
That was an
coming from?
Asian person.
Asian person.
Oh gosh, see, the self hatred is pathetic.
It's deep, dude.
Yeah, it's
Right? It's
pathetic.
so deep. But so I'm
Yeah.
like, now I'm like, I'm gonna talk to the 20%. That's it. Because those are the
Yep.
people who are my people.
Yep.
And the other
Yep.
20% who are on the bottom, like whatever. And then the other, like the 60% in the middle, they're not the ones commenting, they're not the ones who are sharing, they're just quietly observing. But the more you speak to that 20% who get it, I feel like the more that the other 60% will be swayed.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it's. I feel like the more I've written on the LinkedIn, on my posts and other things, the more I've had others start doing it too. It's like leading by example. They see like, oh,
Yeah.
in our culture, it's very much about permission. It's like, oh, I'm
Yes.
allowed to do that. I'm allowed to say that. I didn't know that. And so I had to. I mean, when I started speaking out more, it was because like speaking out more publicly was because of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, that I'd been speaking out on behalf of my black friends. And all of a sudden, like, wait, when I speak out for Asians, I'm scared to, because we're not supposed, like your friends, the person said, we're not
Right.
supposed to talk about this. Like, we're not supposed to complain about anything because we're doing good enough. Or, and that my mom's voice in my head saying, why would you risk this and just say something, right? And so,
That.
you know, and again, I think we're worried about a boogeyman that does not exist, that's going to like punish us or reprimand us or do whatever. And honestly, I did a lot of the activism work when we moved to Taiwan during COVID, because we moved the family there for the kids and safety, whatever. But
Hmm.
I realized, I'm like, wow, my friend Steve, who started YouTube, he asked me, like, Dave, how did you do all this stuff? You've done an amazing thing with this Wall Street Journal letter.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, I mean, it's funny, but being here with other amazing Asian founders and people, like, I mean, I was with Ray Chen, concert violinist, Archie Kao, like the Blue Power Ranger actor,
Yeah.
and the
Hold,
founders of
hold on,
Twitch.
hold on. I need to pause because this letter, by the way, for those who haven't heard of it, I think it deserves more time. Just can you tell us
Yeah,
what that letter is? This because this is a big deal.
sure,
I love
sure.
it.
So during COVID, I had seen, just, I mean, in San Francisco, so I would see a lot of the videos of the hate crimes happening,
Oof.
anti-Asian hate crimes happening to this
Yeah.
elders here in the city. They were killed, stabbed, all sorts of things. Then in New York, I saw videos too, and I'm from that area, and it broke my heart, but I didn't know what to do about it. It wasn't until the murders in Atlanta that happened, the shootings that happened, that I realized that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because we had been speaking like outspoken about it for a long time and nobody seemed to care. And I think for me, that was a breaking point. And a lot of friends asked, CEOs and others asked, Dave, what are we going to do? And I said, you know what, I'm writing an open letter. I want you guys to sign it. These are prominent executives, CEOs, people. I said, you guys are, more important than I am, but if you put your names on here, it'll make a difference. And so I just like published it on my Medium, and I started writing down all the names and putting it into a list. And a group of us started to this movement, and we published it, a full page ad in the Wall Street Journal, the letter in bold letters. It said enough. We cook your clothes, we do your nails, we write your code, and you still treat us like we're foreigners in our own country. Our parents don't feel safe walking in the neighborhoods they've walked in for 20, like 30, 40, 50 years anymore. And so it was kind of like enough is enough, but it was signed by you know President Bush, the CEOs
Yeah.
of Google and DocuSign, and all these you know DoorDash and everything.
I think it
Andre
had
Iguodala
eight
signed it.
eight
Eight
thousand
thousand.
leaders.
Yeah, yeah,
Like this was a huge deal. Yeah.
exactly. And for me, it was, if President Bush and J.J. Abrams and Andre Iguodala and all these people, that like, it almost meant more to me when non-Asians signed it, because it finally felt like we were seen. And for me, that was the reason. And a friend of mine asked, like, Dave, why'd you spend $80,000 on an ad in the paper? You could have donated that to a nonprofit helping people on the ground. And I said, you know, don't you realize nobody sees us? Like, we're invisible. If we don't put this out there and create awareness, then we won't be. People won't even know this is happening to us. So when by putting that in the Wall Street Journal, we had people reading it that say, "Hey, I go to like my kid goes to school with that person's kids, or I invested in that person, or I sit on the board with that person." But
Hmm.
all these people who didn't really realize this was happening to our community, they
Hmm.
were going to realize it. And on an interview with Emily Chang on Bloomberg, she asked, why I was doing this. I said, I'm doing this because most people, even Asians, don't realize that, they blame, all these people in America are blaming Asians for COVID and the pandemic, when, Asians literally got us through the pandemic. Without DoorDash and Instacart, you wouldn't be able to feed yourself. Without Zoom, you wouldn't be able to go to work and go to school. Without Peloton, you wouldn't be able to work out. Without Twitch and YouTube, you wouldn't be able to entertain yourself. Like,
Yeah.
Asian Americans founded all these companies that got us through the pandemic. And even Asians didn't know that these companies were founded by Asian Americans. So that's a big reason why I realized, like, what, this was a moment for me, is like, I realized we don't have many people speaking up for us, like,
Hmm.
out there. And so when people started saying, oh, I've never seen this before, it was giving them permission to actually speak up too. And I remember, like, it was great that presidents and big CEOs signed it, but I got it. The most important thing to me was when I got a message from an engineer, a woman who was 38 weeks pregnant, engineer at Apple. She said she was in Mountain View here in the Bay Area, very Asian community. And she
Hmm.
said someone told her to go back to where she came from. And she said, why am I going to have my kid here when,
Yeah.
it feels so unsafe? But then she saw the letter and she said, no, this is my country too. I'm going to stay and fight. I think that to me is way more important than anything. So,
Yes.
like I said before, if it helps that one person,
Yeah.
that's all that matters. And all the haters can say, "Oh, you Asians shouldn't be complaining. You're rich. You do this and that." I'm like, "Fuck that. I don't care what you have to say."
Yeah.
And so, and this was all done while I was in Asia, where I was safe. But my friend
Mm.
Steve from YouTube asked, like, "How did you do all this?" I said, you know, being in Asia with all of you guys who started YouTube, Rotten Tomatoes, Twitch, this, that, like I felt like I had superpowers. Like I didn't have a
Mhm.
boogeyman over my shoulder saying I couldn't do
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
And I realized, my black friends, they said, reached out to me and they said, this is exactly how Nina Simone and Langston Hughes and others who went to West Africa felt. They
Mhm.
felt invincible when they
Mhm.
did their work. And because they felt like they belonged and there was no, like, one telling them they couldn't do this or couldn't do that.
Mhm.
So I said, oh, well, so this is what it feels like to have the energy of a mediocre white guy in America every day. And so I said, when I go
Yeah.
back, I'm gonna do the same. Like, you know
Yeah.
what? Why shouldn't I? Because that's my country
Yeah.
too, and I'm just as American as they are. In fact, I'm doing more for creating jobs and doing other things than most of these people who complain are. And
Yeah.
so that's the way I see it. I say, I see all these haters on there saying, "Oh, immigrants go back to your country." I'm like, my parents are immigrants, and they provided for me, and I'm creating jobs for people. Like, what have you done? You've done nothing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so all you do
No
is
one's gonna be a
complain,
hater.
and
Yeah.
so you know when I see these videos of all these immigrants who are hardworking and giving
Mhm.
back and doing everything the right way,
Mhm.
and then they're being kidnapped from their citizenship meeting, like getting all the way to the finish line, and then having ICE agents there ready to
Mhm.
grab them. I'm like this is all a farce. I mean, these people are working hard and making their like
Mhm.
these dreams happen, and people just want to blame them, for being different or having been born somewhere else. And so,
It's easy.
you know,
It's
yeah,
easy. It's
it's easy.
easy for
Like,
us to become the target because
yeah,
exactly that. We're the model minority, right? Like, oh, like
yeah,
there's a group of you that are rich, and therefore all the other stories,
yeah,
doesn't matter. All the
yeah.
other experiences doesn't matter. You deserve it because there's a group of you that are doing well, and we constantly still see this in the stories. Hey, I just wanted to let you know that Big Asian Energy is officially out, and you can go and pick it up anywhere you buy books, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, etc. If you've ever felt like there's something stopping you from reaching your full potential, if you've ever felt like you want to have that unstoppable charisma and confidence in the work that you do, as well as just the way you show up in life, this might be the book for you. It is a book that is jam-packed with research studies, advice, case studies, stories, and of course, so many different techniques and takeaways, including communication, as well as mindset, as well as confidence, and all the other topics out there. It just won one of the best books of 2025 on Amazon. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go take a look. And finally, if you have a few seconds, can I also ask you to leave a quick review for Big Asian Energy? It not only means the world to us to hear from you, but more importantly, it does absolutely help us in reaching more audiences. I hope you're having an amazing day, and thanks again. Now, I want to come back to, how do we then get more seen as the leaders that we are? Because you interview leaders all the time. And I'm always curious, like, do you notice that there's a difference between Asian leaders and non-Asian leaders, both of whom have succeeded? Are the Asian leaders just better at pretending to be white?
Interesting. Um, I would say that is the case because some folks you can't necessarily pretend. I mean, some people argue that some you assimilate very well. I
Yeah.
think for a lot of the like Indian men who are leaders, they assimilate very well because they actually socialize well. I
Yeah.
mean, English is their first language, but they actually socialize in those circles too. I think for the folks I know, they have built relationships that are you can't just be friends with Asians at work. It's just not going to work.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it very much is a kind of not a fearlessness, but a confidence in themselves that
Mm.
they belong in those rooms. I think if you ever, people can smell fear, and it's like if you are sitting at the far end of the table or in the back row of the circle on the table, like they're not going to see you,
Yeah.
and you're going to have to put up with stuff like if you're an Asian woman and you're the CEO, and some partner comes in at a biz dev meeting or something and says, "Oh, I'll have a cup of black coffee with like some sugar." It's like, oh, I'm the C, and then so that happens, but
Those are real stories, by the way.
real stories. Oh, no, I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
I think he had that story, but I think it's I think it's a matter of like you have to have thick skin and put up with that,
Yeah.
but you can take it as a slight or you could take it as fuel. And I think
Mm.
a lot of people, will take it as, oh man, they make me feel like terrible about myself.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like, dude, this mediocre guy, this loser who got here through his because his parents or whatever like way he got here, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'll wipe him clean. Like
Yeah.
I don't care about him. So for me, that's the kind of I mean, look, I've met enough mediocre bozos working and being in the valley that are literally only have their jobs because their parents are rich or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, like they couldn't, they couldn't hang a hat on any like thing. So I'm like,
Yeah. Fuck
I
those
don't
guys.
exactly. That's my attitude. This is my attitude.
Right.
Um,
Real. Like really. Like yeah. Fuck those
yeah,
guys.
yeah,
Yeah.
keep your name out of my mouth. But yeah, I think that's the kind of the thing where it's like, and I often will be like, oh, I used to think it's like, oh, I haven't proven myself because I don't have a $1 billion company or I haven't done that yet. But I'm like, neither have some of these guys. And I think a lot of times we don't think about we don't think about how other people get to where they are. Like we think
Mm.
they all deserved where they got to because that's our mentality of meritocracy and
Mhm.
the mindset that we've always been raised with. But if
Mhm.
you dig deeper and you think about, wait, who is this person actually? How'd they get here? Like, oh wait, their dad was the CEO of such and such. Oh, their
Mhm.
dad was the this and that. Oh, their mom, like they're third generation Princeton. I'm like, oh, okay. So I mean, you just have to dig a little deeper because sometimes it's very obvious. Like this person doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about. And you're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, that's why. That's why they're
Mhm.
here. So I mean, I've learned this from like working in a lot of big corporate places that, things aren't always that they seem as they seem.
Mhm.
And you will put yourself down or make yourself small because you think, oh, well, that person is way more important than me. I'm like, are they though? And so if you think about hierarchy all the time because we're stuck in this filial piety meritocracy mindset where like they earn where they got.
Mhm.
No,
No, they don't.
they got there because they were friends with the board. They
Mhm.
got there because they're this and that. I mean, the number of CEOs I've seen in and out of places because they got in because they knew someone, I
Mhm.
mean, it's very real. And
Mhm.
so the difference is we need to know those people too. We need to get in those rooms. We need to get in those like socialize with people, join those golf clubs, sit on those nonprofit boards, be in those places. But if we're not in those places, we'll never get to those, in those rooms. So for me, it's about getting in those rooms. And so a lot of it is less about acting white, like a white male, than it is, asserting yourself and you
Mhm.
know how people say when you give a talk or you're giving public speaking, think of everyone else in the room as naked, and
Yeah.
it'll make it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Do your homework and think about other people in that room. Is like, oh, actually, you're not that much better than me. Like you
Yeah.
came from this, you came from that. I'm like, why should I be afraid or worried about you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
They're human. I
yeah,
think this was the hardest thing that I had to go through when I first started this was realizing that all these people that you look at and previously there's this kind of internal grading system, right? It's like, oh, like their title, their, like their
yeah,
finances, whatever it is. And then you realize that, yeah, like behind that is a human who has fears, has struggles, who
has
wakes up
insecurities.
stressed.
Yep.
I've been in so many rooms at this point where I've talked to people who are, whose net worths are in, hundreds of millions of dollars and up. And you realize they have the exact same struggles. If some of them have more, like
Yeah,
they're stressed about their kids, they're stressed out about
yeah,
themselves, they're wondering about, their marriages, their relationships. They're just humans. They have the
yeah,
same exact processes that we all do. They
yeah.
just took different actions along the way and had different starting points.
Yeah, and 100%. And I think, the more we understand that, and I'm not saying all these people are bad people. I think it's more of a stop putting yourself down
Yeah.
or making yourself smaller because you think these people are better. They
Yeah.
all have the same, baggage you do. They have the same insecurities. They hide it better than you do. They have more confidence because their parents told them that, you know, I've heard a Singaporean or a comedian talk about this. Like, white people, they're told when they're kids that a stork brought them from the sky and they're brought from the heavens as a child. And then your parents told you picked up from a garbage can. And so my dad literally said that to me when he found you in a garbage. And so when you think about the difference, like, oh,
Oh
like
man.
live, do, your their parents say pursue your dreams, be what you want to
100%.
do, be the best at what you want to do. And then our parents are like, you will be these three things, or we'll not pay for your school, or you will be living on the street. We don't want you to come home again. But it's like, wow, it's a very different, when you're brought up with that you can do anything, you can be president, you can be a professional baseball star, whatever. You think, oh, I can actually aspire to like you
Yeah.
know, to huge goals.
Yeah.
Whereas, for us, it's like, oh, I aspire to be like, as Hassan said, we're middle management at Deloitte is my biggest aspiration. So it's, and I think that kind of confidence or even aspirational goals that we have, they set us apart. And so I
Yep.
think that's why we deal with these things differently and we
Mhm.
portray ourselves differently. But that doesn't mean we're any less than than anyone else. But we have to stop beating ourselves up about that. And I think Domi Shi and I did a podcast interview with her recently about storytelling, and we talked about why we think Asians aren't great, like in terms of like public speaking or storytelling. And a lot of it, I think, is that we weren't raised with that value, or we didn't talk about our feelings. And where for Pixar movies, you have to really connect to your feelings. We were told to suppress our
Mhm.
feelings. Oh, yeah, cool, don't cry, don't do this, don't do that. Like, like don't show weakness. Never show weakness. Always like show strength. But if you don't connect with the emotions and feelings you have, you can't connect with other people because that vulnerability is how you actually connect with other humans. And
Mhm.
so I think that willingness is how you build relationships. And I think until we're able to do that with people at work and others, just as we know, like you said, these other people are human too. That's when
Mhm.
you'll actually build connections. And so I think we fault ourselves too, because Indian American men, they do better because they're actually willing to socialize with other great groups. A lot of
Mhm.
Asians, they tend to just stick safely with their own, and
Mhm.
so you don't actually end up building relationship with other people who can be helpful. And so I think that's a big reason why we don't connect as well, I think.
So let me see if I can just go back and kind of reflect some of the big lessons and takeaways here. Number one is, really understanding that our upbringing oftentimes felt very restrictive, right? Like we were given these lessons of like, here's three jobs you're allowed to do, and here's the kind of person you should marry, and here's the kind of life you should have, here's the kind of things. And number one really is just breaking out of that frame first and foremost, and
Yeah.
actually coming back to ourselves and really digging and being like, okay, if all of those things didn't exist, who am I? What do I want?
Yeah.
Once you're in that state, and then when you're going into those jobs or going to the workplace, going to leadership positions, number one, realizing that your worth is not defined by what it is that you've already done, but we're all human. The person who is sitting on the other side of your table is also human. The person who is sitting next to you gunning for the same job, who you might look at and be like, okay, he's got 5 years on me, he's also human.
Hmm.
Somebody out there in his family is sick of his shit, just like somebody in your family is sick of yours, right?
Yeah.
We're all dealing with the same thing. We're all human. Be willing to speak up for yourself. Be willing to go into rooms and spaces where you have that trepidation of like, do I belong here? And realize that belonging is not always a given, but it can be created as much
Hmm.
as it can be asserted, right? Like I belong here because I said I belong here,
Yeah.
and now the
That's
room's
right.
changed,
That's
right?
right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's such a big one. And we talked a little bit about Indian men and why it is that many of them, there was an MIT study that shows that like many of them don't have the same struggles, is because they're willing to speak up for themselves, be amongst those outside of the only
Mhm.
Asian spaces that many of us kind of cluster into because we find safety in it. These are things that all will have very tangible changes that can be taken away and applied in 2026.
Yep, yep. And one of the things I think I came to the conclusion right after all this journey and writing everything I do, I realized I started from a place where I felt Asians are invisible, like we just feel invisible and we feel unseen.
Mhm.
But I realized that the hardest thing, the realization was we feel like we're unseen, but oftentimes we don't even see ourselves. And so
Oh, okay. Hold up, hold up, hold up.
when I
Dude,
came up with that,
dude, that was a mic drop moment.
no, I know. I was like, I came to that in the middle of the night. I was like, dude, like that's the real problem. Like we don't even see ourselves. So how can anyone else see us?
Yes.
So I think for me, the writing, everything I do to the podcast, the investing is like, hey, the more I can help us see who we are and give us permission to see ourselves instead of what our parents see, what minority myth and the media sees, what everyone else tells us we're supposed to be. I'm like, until we see ourselves, we can't be seen. Like we
Mhm.
are blending into the narrative that someone else is telling about us. And we have agency and we can advocate for ourselves and we can tell our own stories. We don't all have to be, like, oh, like writing the same stories. There could be some really unique stories that have never been told, but we
Mm-hmm.
feel like, oh, but that's not. I'm in a box. Like I can't tell that. That's not my story to tell. It's like, but why not? Why would you? You're your own person. So I think until we find that in ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
um, no one's going to see us. And so I feel like I've finally broken through, and I see, like, I've seen myself, and now I'm like, this is who I am. And like, I'm unapologetic about it. And I think you have too. And I think the more we set that example for others, the
Mm-hmm.
more they will break out of their kind of their safe boxes as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only way I know how to lead is to do it by example.
I love that. I also want to shift now to there's something that I've always really resonated with you on is the idea of building our own table. This has always been like a key pillar idea that I had. Like
Yeah,
we're not accepted at every table. Okay, well fuck your table. Then we'll build our own table. Tell
that's
me
right.
more about what that actually looks like in your world and how you have seen that maybe in our community.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a systems thinker. I think when the hardest part of seeing everyone, all the news articles of people being attacked, was
Mm-hmm.
that I could raise all the money in the world, I could start nonprofits, but I cannot stop a crazy person from attacking, like my mom or something like
Jeez,
that.
yeah.
And so if they were hateful, whatever they can, but what I can do is show that our community isn't doormats, that we're not gonna like just take this sitting down, and we have
Mm-hmm.
power.
Mm-hmm.
And so that in a lot of ways is, how do we help to create this table, but build kind of power and presence for our community. And a lot of that is like, how do I, if I invest in Asian founders who become really successful, then they become the next covers of like the Jensen covers and others of Time
Mm-hmm.
magazine and whatnot. If I help support candidates like Andy Kim or Michelle Wu, and people see the mayor of Boston, the senator from New Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
Ted Lieu and others, they see that like we have power. If I help support like Lucy Liu and John Chu, and they see the filmmakers and the media and the movie stars, they're like, then they will see us and see it show us up having power. But that doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like you have to bring along other people with you, and that's not just Asian people. Like
Mm-hmm.
I feel strongly about my Black friends and Hispanic friends, and how they're left out of the table too. And it's like, how do you continue to add seats? Because you can take it, all these spots for yourself, and you can. And a lot of Asians, when you have scarcity mindset and mentality, you do take it for yourself. You keep it for yourself. You don't. Philanthropy is not a thing. You think about your generations. You think about your household. You don't think about who else you want to help. You think about kind of helping yourself, because you
Mm-hmm.
don't know when. You keep thinking, and you play from a place of fear that you might lose all of it instantly, because your parents came from regimes or places that they did lose all of it because the government took away everything in an instant. So you never know. So I understand where that fear comes from,
Mm-hmm.
but at some point you have to let that go. And I think when you're raised with that scarcity mindset, you don't want the table to grow bigger. You kind of like, hey, there's only enough for me, and you hoard and you keep
Mm-hmm.
everything. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, abundance mindset, you bring more people with you, the table grows bigger on its own. If I bring to the table others who can add value, and then together, like I say, 1 plus 1 actually equals 3, the sum is more than its parts, then you can, like, I introduce people all the time that I'm like, hey, you guys should meet, because I know the two of you can do some magic together, and all of a sudden way more happens because of those two connecting. But
Mm-hmm.
the more you generously offer to build and connect and think of growing, the more that table opens up, and then there's more room for others. And so for me, it's about lifting up, how do I get that person who's, the director when I'm a like VP, to also be a VP? How do I get that person on this board with me? How do I get this person invested in this company with me? How do
Mm-hmm.
so kind of bringing along others with you, because it does matter. Other communities do it really well. Like the
Yeah.
Jewish community, Black community, they all do it really well.
Huge.
We kind of tend to not, we worry about like, oh, I don't want to share this with like them, because that, what if they take more of it from me or whatnot? And it's kind of like this,
Yeah.
the pie is finite, so you're afraid of
Yeah.
losing your piece. Whereas if you think you can grow the pie bigger, you'll have more. You'll have more people to eat the pie. You'll have more pie for everyone. But
Yeah.
I think it's that switch that a lot of people don't have.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. I think that a lot of this type of like crab in a bucket mentality that we see really comes from fear. And I don't come from a perspective of blame. I'm just like, yeah, it's unfortunate that up to this point you don't realize that how much blue ocean there really is. And Dave, you really, I think, exemplify somebody who truly is the kind of person who will open the door behind you and hold it open, and release the ladder and help others up. I'm always curious to hear, for people who may not have, supportive people like you, how do they go about finding that, especially if they are in a place that isn't like San Francisco, LA,
Yeah,
or New York?
yeah.
How do they find allies?
I mean, I think that the internet is a terrible place, but it's also a wonderful place. You can hear our podcast, you can read read essays, you can be on LinkedIn, and you can find those folks in other places. I have folks that reach out to me from like Australia, from Canada, from all over the place that
Yeah.
are like in the middle of like Alberta or whatever, and they
Hmm.
just say they read my content, they think they're very thankful for it, but
Hmm.
it's like that feeling of connection. But people reach out all the time, and I respond to them, and I have communication with them. But I think just reach out. Our fear is that we'll get rejected when you reach out, but the internet
Yeah.
is an amazing place, and who knows? Like I tell you, John, you should move to LA and be among more
By the way,
people.
I'm coming down. Just, I'm not even joking. I literally have marked one of my goals to 2026 is like go come down to the Bay Area and LA at least 3 times.
Yeah,
And when I'm coming down, I'm gonna hit you up. I'm just letting you
no, for
know.
sure. But
But
that's the
yeah,
thing. You
we
can
don't have to keep
find
that part in the episode.
Yeah,
But
right. We've been show that. No, but like basically, it's like you can find your people, and it's like
find your
that might not be
people.
where you are, but
Yeah.
reach out to them, find that community, and then go there and be with them. And who knows, you may end up having to move, and you'll be there. But I mean, you are not alone. The world is much smaller than you think, and the internet makes it smaller. But I think finding those connections, hearing from people that you think might not respond to you, you never know. You find those mentors, you find the connections, but I think it is important to have that. Otherwise, this is one of the reasons I write and do all this is because I know there are a lot of people like that with no outlet, no mentorship, no one in their lives. Because I didn't, like I think a lot of people I know didn't have mentors growing up or working that look like them. And so if I can be that for some people, or if I can introduce them to the stories of people that
Mhm.
could be mentors or inspire them, like all the podcast guests,
Mhm.
that's one more person I'm able to help. So
Amazing. And I think this is a perfect time for us to, say, one of the core messages you probably hear if you're a listener on the show is our motto is, rising tides rises all ships. And as always, if you heard something on this episode that really resonated, and honestly, I mean, there's been so many things that I'm going to go ahead and bookmark. Make sure to share it with somebody. I'm a really big believer that it's not about how much you receive, it's about how much you give, because it's
mm,
truly exponential. The more that I give, the more that I'm always like trying to promote people and like put them on platforms and share and share and share, because the more I find that I'm giving other people resources, it is exponential how much
yep,
more it comes back, because
yep,
it's a pool, right?
yeah,
It's a pool, and we're all just creating, we're
yep,
creating, and it really like it helps us all rise. Now,
yeah.
Dave, we talked about how people can find you on your show, on your LinkedIn, on your Substack. Go and get subscribe to the Substack. It's like there's it goes deep. It goes so good. What's next for you? 2026.
Yeah. Well, so I wasn't even gonna do a podcast, and now I'm deep in it. So I'll do another season of the podcast. Still keeping I'll keep writing on my Substack, daveblue.com. But I'm working on another documentary about Martin Yan, the chef with Jimmy O Yang. We're trying to produce that documentary because, Julia Childs has had two feature films made after in a HBO series, but Martin Yan's done 3,500 episodes for PBS, and he's like a legend. 3,500 episodes, and
Wow.
he's been around
Wow.
since 1992 on TV, and
Yeah.
he's the first Asian American comedian. But we want to do his story, and then I think there's I've got some other stuff in up my sleeve, but again, building a bigger table is what I'm working on.
Is Yang Martin Yan is the guy who was like, I remember him from like the 80s. He was like the
Yes,
Yang can cook and
Yang
so
Kim
can
Cook.
you guy, right?
Yes, he is. So
Love
he's
that
a
guy
legend.
is a legend.
A legend. And so he crossed so many cultures, and he brought so many people together around like Chinese food, and he demystified Asian food for people, and he was hilarious. And so I think
Yeah.
Jimmy O Yang says he's the first Asian American comedian because he was in Hong Kong watching him. And so I think for me, that story, those are the stories that need to be told, and so I'm trying to work on making that project. And also another project about how all the YouTube creators back in the day, they were all Asian, and they're the ones who started and inspired all the current creators now, the Wang Fu's and Ryan Higas and everyone else, but Michelle Fans. But so, again, I'm just trying to tell our stories because if we don't tell them, who will?
I love the way you put that. If we don't tell them, who will? And so I 100% agree.
I know you
I
agree with a
agree
lot.
with
You agree with a lot.
what's that?
You agree with a lot of what I say, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if I didn't agree with it, this would be a much more
Yeah, contentious episode.
confusing conversation for sure.
Yeah.
Um, what are three, I would say, tangible pieces of advice that you would give to really anyone who is either they're entrepreneurs who are looking, you're in the VC world, but
Yeah.
entrepreneurs or people who are in companies who want to make 2026 their best year ever? What three pieces of advice that are
Mm.
actionable would you give them?
I always tell people the most important skill you can have is storytelling.
Mm,
Learn how to tell your story. Learn how to tell stories. It's not something that we were raised, valuing, but it is the most important skill you can have in sales and fundraising, and any work environment is so people will listen. You have to be able to tell a story, and that's around anything. The second thing is to care less about what other people think of you. The more you are unabashedly yourself and authentic, the more people will actually be drawn to you too. And I think that that's always going to set you apart from others. And so the last one I think is seek out sponsors and mentors. I think we need to build more relationships with people that can support us and help us. It isn't a solo journey. If you're at a workplace or you're starting a company, reach out to folks. I think a lot of times we're so afraid of rejection and failure that we're afraid to even ask for help, and that's something that is part of our culture too, because it supposedly shows weakness. But I think it's a sign of strength if you can ask and ask people for help, because those are the folks that will give you the advice you need to avoid mistakes they made, to maybe introduce you to people that'll be helpful. You never know what doors will open, because I've found that many times over, when you open a door for someone, they open 10 doors for you. And so that generosity was always going to be repaid. And you shouldn't expect it to be repaid when you do something for someone, but when it does, it comes back tenfold. And so I think building that reputation is really, really important.
mm. Love it. Beautiful. And once again, if you want to find out more about Dave, check out his Substack, check out his show. DaveLu.com is your website. Is that correct?
Yep.
Amazing. And once again, thank you so much for coming and sharing all of your wisdom, Dave.
This was fun. Thanks, John.
As always, if there's something on the show that you thought was useful, please make sure to share it with somebody in your life. As always, we say is when we rise together. And I'll see you on the next one. Happy holidays.